Welcome to NNT on Halloween. Thought I should explain that in case you're wondering what all the dripping blood and creepy images are. I know that NNT and cybersecurity is quite a scary, bloody project usually, but it's especially so when it's 31st of October and Halloween. But yeah, we've got a very, very scary webinar for you today, so please ask any children or the infirm to leave the room. I cannot be held responsible for any sleepless nights that may ensue from what you're about to see. So I did say it's going to be scary, and it's pretty atmospheric. The organ music going in the background. I did warn you, there'd be scary, horrible, frightening sights. Once seen cannot be unseen, but the most terrifying sight by far, a ransomware demand. Yeah, pretty horrible. I'll run a poll at the end of this and find out if anybody's actually been hit by any of this stuff or had direct first-hand. Touching wood and fingers crossed and everything at NNT, we've been fortunate or prudent enough to steer clear of all of this so far. You may be thinking, well, you're a cybersecurity company, so of course you would do, but what I'll show you later on is that it's pretty indiscriminate in who gets hit and who falls victim to this. And in fact, you know, just in this year, you know, highly topical thing, the ransomware demand that I showed you earlier. This is from a classification known as Petya, although they call it not Petya, actually this one, because although it looked a lot like the Petya malware that had been seen before, it was actually pretty different, but by the time they worked that out, it had already been banded Petya, so that's why it's sort of Petya, not Petya. But this was the one, you probably read about it, the WPP group, this massive advertising organization, huge, you know, 18 billion revenues, colossal resources at the disposal, clearly very experienced and mature in IT and information security terms, absolutely crippled for days for some of their offices. And you know, if it can happen to them, it's you know, obviously something that could strike anywhere. I mean, in that particular case, that ransomware, the Petya, or not Petya, ransomware ended up right across Europe, sort of hit Ukraine to begin with, but spread globally because it used this eternal blue, eternal worm capability, this SMB vulnerability that the NSA had discovered, had only told everybody after they'd been using it for some time, and therefore there's a slight delay in getting patches out. And even though it was a fairly old thing, many organisations fell victim to it. Not least the UK's NHS service, so the National Health Service in the UK. We have almost a single healthcare provider, which is government run. It's a nationalised industry. Again, colossal resources at their disposal. In fact, I think it's the 5th largest employer in the world, just behind sort of McDonald's and Walmart, Chinese army and so on. So massive resources, massive experience, and actually you could argue that the bigger you are, the sort of more prone you are to a ransomware attack. The more people you have using email, using devices, visiting websites, the more potential there is to be struck by one of these ransomware infections. Really, I think the initial message to get across from the webinar today is that, you know, even though there's plenty of zombies around today on Halloween, we need to make sure that we snap back into life and take action. So this globally, just to show how indiscriminate ransomware is, you can see where it's hitting hardest. There's a rough correlation between where infections are reported and the level of industrialization, I suppose you could say. You know, China are ordinarily very insular in terms of internet usage and access, but still reports being hit. And you know, that's one of the big things we've seen. As I mentioned earlier, this sort of eternal blue worm capability. This, you know, once one machine was infected, the ability to spread across the network using this Microsoft networking vulnerability, the SMB flaw that was in existence and is still in existence if you haven't patched or configured your systems correctly to block that out. Hopefully everybody's definitely heard about it and knows how to deal with that now. But certainly with the Petya, not Petya, that was deemed, actually, due to some of the characteristics of it, that it was designed to be disruptive. Some talk of this being a sort of nation state, possibly Russian-backed, in order to hit Ukraine hardest because it was originated in a predominantly Ukrainian-used accountancy package. Unfortunately, that package was actually used in lots of non-Ukrainian organisations, including WPP Group. They traded and did have some instances of that particular package within their organisation, and that's what struck them. And then the worm capability took over. But again, the overwhelming message that you should be taking on board, and hopefully, using some of this to sort of educate your colleagues or company management, at least, that, ransomware gets the great and the good and, the big and the small all the time. The most commercially savvy and the sort of for good healthcare providers as well, that they've all been hit already. And it probably means that your organization just simply isn't immune, and while you're not immune, you do need to take action, and that's part of what this webinar is about as well, what we can do to help ourselves. Okay, so it's a webinar, an IT webinar, so we do need some graphs. The most interesting takeaway from this, the top graph, is that it sort of bucks the trend. Normally, any graph is designed to show, yeah, this stuff is getting worse and worse by the day. It's double what it was last year. In this, you can't really pick out any trend or theme to it. What that says to me is that this is almost a day-by-day changing landscape. On a month-by-month basis, let's say, the battlefront changes. Sometimes the bad guys are winning. Sometimes we're defending better and we're sort of getting on top, but there's always a fresh attack coming, and the next one could be the one that's more successful, the one that does catch us out, does get around our defences. And it's a bit of an unfair contest, all of this. And again, as a message to take to the powers that be within your organisation to really take this stuff seriously, is that, as well as we might defend, we've got to get it right 100% of the time. Every single day, we've got to win this fight. The bad guys have only got to win one, then we're infected, and we've then got days and possibly months of aggravation ensuing from that, possibly data lost forever, and severe disruption to our operations. And this is kind of borne out by the lower graph, which shows that some work better than others. As said earlier, you only need one to succeed, and it's going to be a nightmare on your street. A few years ago, it was reported that AV is dead, and it's not quite dead. It's more the living dead, keeping in the theme of today. It's still alive, just about, but it's increasingly ineffective as zero-day malware that's been modified to look unique, look original. And once AV being a blacklist-based technology, it needs to have knowledge of what distinguishes malware or ransomware. It's looking for characteristics, usually a signature, usually the hash of the file, or some characteristic within the file that it's dealing with, for it to be able to identify the ransomware from all of the other file system activity that's going on. Zero day means unknown, and that renders the malware invisible, totally untracked by the AV. So what we need to do is take that on board. I think that's a message that's fairly well understood. What the alternative is, well, there's several things that you can bring into play here, but we do need to organise and arm ourselves far more effectively to deal with this stuff. So how does it happen? Well, primarily it's still email, phishing attacks. it means that it really plays into those sort of graphs and charts and the the map of the world showing the incidence of ransomware outbreaks. Email, you can spam this stuff out at an enormous rate. You can cover a huge amount of ground, and again, you're only looking for a tiny fraction of a percentage to hit home for your work to be seen as effective if you're one of these cyber criminals trying to make ransomware pay for you. It's the most common means of invoking a ransomware attack. The home user market, if you like, for the extortionists lends itself well to mass emailing. But bring your own device, people working from home, VPNs, and so on and so forth. That just means that that can be another sort of vector, another route in for the ransomware into our corporate network. So even though your corporate perimeter may be well defended or your core servers, be aware that your users are still exposing your organization to this threat on an increasing basis as they begin to sort of mix Facebook on corporate machines and logging on from home iPads or home devices. We also saw, particularly last year, and it's still going on, specifically corporations being hit by this and being compelled to pay ransoms or thinking that's the right way to go. So the LA hospital, that they concluded that was their best way out. They didn't have backups, they didn't have any fallback, and were desperate enough to pay the ransom. We'll talk more about that later on, because still the sort of received wisdom is don't pay a ransom. It's far from necessarily the right way or an effective way to get your data back, because the problem with dealing with criminals is that they don't play fair. So you're just as likely to pay them and be asked to pay even more money, or pay them and still get nothing in return. I think one of the things we also want to put across here is ransomware is malware, and it's no different to any other form of malware in terms of how it gets onto systems. And what I talk about now is that if we're acknowledging the sort of vector, the sort of interface for ransomware to get into our systems is the email, the browser, visiting a malicious website, this term of a drive-by, you just got to, rub up against, visit a website to become infected. Browsers increasingly have, capability to run active content, and that provides a vulnerability, an exploitable vulnerability to get malware into our system. So it makes sense, in particular when we're talking about the ransomware threat, to look very hard at how can we better defend our desktops, our user workstations, because they're a significant weak spot for this indiscriminate ransomware that's just washing around the internet on spam emails and poison and toxic websites. So the first place to start really with this is make sure these things are hardened. Most of them, the developers of these email clients, browsers, desktop applications, are very aware that they're exploitable and vulnerable to attack. There's a huge amount of investment and capability built into these pieces of software to mitigate an attack. The problem is, as with most of these hardening measures, the default setting is biased towards sort of openness, ease of use, ease of access, free operation. And in order to provide maximum security, that inevitably means just slightly compromising functionality, tightening up on the freedom of usage, so that it's more difficult for malware to infiltrate our systems. One of the good things about today, you very rarely get anything free or useful, but we did say at the start of this, anyone who attends, we'll kit you out with a copy of Change Tracker Gen 7. I'll show you a little bit of that later on. But not only will we give you the software, a trial pack to use indefinitely, we'll arm it to the teeth with what we call our ransomware mitigation kit. I'll show you some of this later, but it's a combination of reports to first of all audit, to hunt down vulnerabilities where they exist within our desktop applications and server and workstation platforms. But we can also provide the scripts or the group policy objects to automatically configure the security settings that you best need to mitigate against attack, and we'll kit you out with those as well. We've got some great technology here that's been developed for many years now. Really is a mature and effective capability that we have at our disposal, and we want to make sure we get as many looks and as much experience of this as possible. So we're going to give out some samples of that and hope you make good use of it, and I'll show you that later on. Of course, I mentioned about AV a moment again. You know, it is still going to help. I joked about it being the living dead. It will still protect against ransomware, just not the very latest zero-day ransomware. And there's a never-ending supply of that. So AV has a part to play, regularly updated, regular scans, on-access scans for attachments and so on, but it's only one small fragment of what we need to do in order to protect ourselves. Last thing about this is that you know, when we talk about the hardening of the application and the platform, that also involves settings within the application, but harnessing other capabilities as well. So we will talk to you a little bit in a moment about things like emits and other capabilities you can bring into play. I mean, it sounds complicated. What I'm trying to do is let you know that there's plenty of tools at your disposal in order to harden devices. As I mentioned, though, using these, there's a number of automated methods to configure in this hardened stance to the application and platform, and we can kit you out with that, so we'll make sure you get that. Okay, so some of the other things that we can do, the more sort of advanced preventive measures. Microsoft EMET, there was some talk it was going to be phased out for Windows 10, so if you are at Server 2016 or Windows 10, you've got the most secure Windows operating system you can. But actually, EMET is still seen as a really useful thing. Much like AV, you know, it's not 100% effective in stopping all attacks, but it is going to give you some extra holds and moves, some extra defense capabilities. So that should be invoked. Again, you don't need to worry too much about how to configure this thing, because through our work as a certified CIS vendor, so if anybody's heard of the Center for Internet Security, they're the cybersecurity's lead authority. Really, they get together with academic institutions, security researchers, the manufacturers. In fact, there's a big team of CIS folks who work out in the Seattle Redmond area to work with Microsoft as well as other manufacturers, so that as Microsoft introduce additional hardening measures, security features to the product, they're well understood, and we have the smarts to configure those. Another area that's gained more popularity, and it's really in response to the AV problem. AV is all about blacklisting, so we populate the AV with a blacklist. We know that these files are all malware, they're ransomware. If you see these items on a machine, quarantine them, get rid of them. And that's fallible because stuff that we don't already know, so not yet known malware, by its definition cannot exist on a blacklist because we don't know about it. So the alternative to that is to take a whitelist approach. You know, there's a number of manufacturers still trying to provide hard whitelisting. By that I mean sort of application control. If an application, down to its process, the files underlying that application are not whitelisted, they've not been ordained as safe to run, then the default operation will be to block operation. As you can imagine, a lot of stuff gets blocked, and with files always being updated, new applications, new mixes of applications and settings on machines, it can be pretty disruptive when you try and run this stuff. If you want to try it, again, for the Microsoft workstations and servers, Microsoft AppLocker, been around for a couple of years now, and it's there waiting to be invoked. You have to decide to use it. Only you can configure it, because your blend combination of applications is going to be unique to you and your organization. So it has to be effectively manually configured by you. There's an option to run in, as illustrated here, an audit-only mode, so you can sort of learn and let you know what's running before you build your blocking policy. But as I say, many people have tried and found it a bit too much. So at NNT, we actually favour a monitoring approach, and I'll show you. We've got a really simple, easy to use service and process whitelisting, blacklisting capability, so that you can benchmark a machine and then alert on any unusual activity. The last point on this is just really about, one of the flaws with AppLocker was that if a machine did get hit with some malware, then in the same way that the malware can run encrypt files, it can disable something like AppLocker. So with the newest generation of CPUs that are all have virtualization capability, AppLocker is going virtualized. So you'll start to hear about this thing called Windows Defender Device Guard. It's effectively AppLocker, but with a virtualized and therefore segregated hypervisor to watch over the machine kernel operation. And because it's a hypervisor type model, it's inherently protected against a malware attack in the first wave, at least, because it's effectively like running a virtualized machine at the desktop. Pretty new, and will require some careful thought and consideration. But again, if you've come along today to find out what are the best things you can do to protect yourself, then there's something else you should investigate and consider. Okay, so moving on. So if we're not able to always defend or lock out the ransomware and indeed other malware, then that's not the end of the story, because if we arm ourselves with good detection mechanisms, then that's going to give us another line of defense, an early warning system at least, that there's breach activity to alert about. And certainly that's a strong hand for NNT. We specialize in system integrity monitoring, real-time, continuous, non-stop system integrity monitoring, so that if there's any breach activity, new files, new processes, services, changes at the registry level, changes at the file level, new software, we detect that and alert on it. So great applications for standard change control, which is great security best practice anyway, but certainly in the case of ransomware or other breaches, as new files are introduced, new processes start, we will detect that and we can alert you. And that could be the difference between one machine being breached and some files being encrypted versus the entire organization brought to its knees because you've seen something like the WannaCry that's spread rapidly throughout the organization. So system integrity monitoring, file integrity monitoring, absolutely critical to make sure that is invoked, make sure it's real time, make sure it's the most sophisticated. And we talked about whitelisting of applications a moment ago. Something else that we do at NNT, which really brings this stuff to its best implementation, is if you back up that file system monitoring with a comprehensive file whitelist repository. So we have our thing called Fast Cloud Threat Intelligence. That's populated with the intelligence of over 4 billion known safe files. What it means is that as your updates get delivered or new applications get installed, we can validate those as known safe files. And the beauty of that is that if you get an infection on a machine, file-based, okay, the AV may miss it because it's zero-day malware, but by the same token, if it is zero-day malware, it won't be whitelisted. It won't exist within something like our fast cloud. So at least you get a chance to say, to be alerted that there's some file system activity here of suspicious, suspect files on the machine, non-whitelisted. Okay, they didn't get picked up by the AV, but we've qualified them in another way, and therefore these should be investigated, should be backed out. So really, the best situation is, yes, use AV sandbox blacklisting technology, but make sure that you complement that with a decent whitelist capability, and make sure it is a good one. If it's there's a number of attempts at this, but ours sucks up the information from a number of sources and gives us, like I say, this massive sort of 4 to 5 billion files, and it's growing daily, so it really is hugely comprehensive. Final thing on there, I will show you this service, the process monitoring, in a moment, and that gives you another line of defense. Okay, so what happens if, okay, so maybe we do harden, maybe we still get breached, we still get some ransomware. It's detected, we get our alerts, illegal processes, illegal file system activity. How can we recover from an infection? Well, there's a set process to go through, really, and you know, a lot of this talks, a lot of the advice in this is really make sure that you do have a fallback. If you've got a good regular backup of the documents, the file system that's been encrypted, then your easiest and quickest way to dig out of a ransomware attack is, more often than not, scrap the platform, re-image it, and then restore from backup. Obviously, make sure that the backup isn't just a sort of share or a connected drive, because most ransomware variants will sniff out any attached volumes or file systems and encrypt the files on those too. So make sure it's, you know, it's an automated connects then disconnects, or physically connects and disconnects if it's a home machine backup medium. There is still hope beyond that, though. If you haven't come across this nomoreransom.org website, it's probably worth looking at it before you get full victim, because it's worth getting familiar with how it works on there. There's a function on here called the crypto sheriff page, and what it invites you to do is upload one of the files encrypted by the ransomware, or let them see the ransom note that you receive. From that can be assessed against known previous ransomware attempts, and you might be lucky. You know, it might be something that other people have already fallen victim to, but there's been enough time spent on it to either derive decryption keys, possibly somebody pays the ransom, or a researcher is able to unlock the ransomware files and get at the keys that are used, and you shouldn't rule that out. So you know, there is help at hand, even though it may seem like a pretty desperate situation, and more often than not is and will be, but it's not the end of the line necessarily, even if you haven't got a backup. But as with everything, you know, prevention better than cure. Okay, thanks for that. Well, that's been great to cover the background. I was going to go into a bit of practical now. We sort of covered the theory, the scary part of this, and hopefully there's been some new ideas there. What I'll do, I'll jump over to the live demonstration. Just as a point of, because there's a lot of people on the call, it's not going to be practical to open the audio for Q&A, but there is a chat facility if you want to shoot any questions in. I'll pick up some of those. There's also a questionnaire afterwards that we can use, and for getting hold of your trial copy, and you know, maybe seeing a demo or talking to us further about how you can use software, we'll be glad to help. So just to whet your appetite, here's a Change Tracker Gen 7 system. I mean, I've just got one device in here, but this is designed to cover entire corporate estates. We've got some, you know, huge organisations. I mentioned them earlier, and people like Walmart, NHS, and various banks and so on. So we're already helping plenty of organisations to defend against the ransomware threats, as well as meet their compliance obligations. And I've got a couple of things set up here that I'd like to show you. So the first thing is, I mentioned these ransomware mitigation kits earlier. So what I've been running here, you can see I've sort of been playing around with the demo system, but I've run, see here it's called the NNT CIS benchmark. That's because this has been derived in conjunction with the Centre for Internet Security. So this report comprises the very best knowledge about how to make Outlook as secure and immune from a ransomware threat as possible. And if I just quickly show you the report, see here, I'm not doing very good. I'm okay. I've blocked out a lot of the threats and potential exploits, but I've got a bunch in there. And the nice thing about the report that we provide you with, you can sort this so you can just see the failures, the things you need to work on. For each of these, we give you a reason why this has been failed. Here, I'm not getting any data for this particular thing, so it's a setting that hasn't been invoked on the machine. And the cool thing is, we give you remediation advice. So, of course, you're going to use group policy setting. In fact, I've got group policy, local group policy editor down here, and you can see that that's the thing we're looking at, the authentication with Exchange Server. It's not being configured. That's a pretty dumb move, because that means it's exploitable without authentication and the guarantee of communicating with the correct server. We're prone to attack there, so that's why it's a setting. The other nice thing, because this is a CIS report, we do give the full information about the rationale behind the threat that exists here, so it explains fully why there's a problem. Now, if that all seems like a long way round, and you could go through one by one configuring these things, well, reading the notes and making sure that we apply those things. The other thing I can do, we provide say this ransomware mitigation kit. So if I come to my desktop here and just take a quick look at what I've got set up here. So this is what you can download from us. So it's an NNT Microsoft Outlook remediation kit. We provide you that report so that you can run and make your assessments. There's also, what's really cool is we provide a GPO with this. So if you have an Active Directory set up, a domain controller for your network, you can take the group policy objects that's provided with this. So that's in here, essentially, bunch of registry settings. Import that in, and you can apply that to all your machines to harden the Outlook. And no surprises, we've got these for things like Firefox, Internet Explorer, Chrome, browsers, other Outlook, other Office applications, PowerPoint, Word, and so on. The other cool thing is that I can actually run this automatically if I take this command out of here. So using the local GPO program provided by Microsoft, I can paste that in. And if I run that, that's going to fire that off. So you see how quick that was to run. Meanwhile, back here, we've updated my group policy. So I'm just going to rerun that report, and we'll come back to that in a second to run that. So let's kick that off, because I've now invoked all those hardening settings, and that will run away nicely. Now, the other thing I want to show you is some sort of active monitoring of this. In fact, you see there, because I opened up the notepad, that spoiled my demo, because I opened that up to read that information, and that's actually, you can see here, it says it's an uncategorized process detected on my system. In fact, what I was going to do was to run PowerShell on the machine and get that to pop up a similar thing, but I can show you how that's done. So if I come here and look at the template that's been derived for this machine. So this is what we do. So this is active monitoring, our active defense against the threats that exist. So I'm monitoring all of these attributes on the machine. So this is full-scale real-time system integrity monitoring. Any changes made in the system 32, the program files locations, all the areas where Trojans like to hang out because they can replace existing system files or program files, get executed, and then instead about their dirty work. What we're doing is real-time tracking of any of those locations. I'll show you how that works in a minute. The other thing I've got set up here, I mentioned it earlier, is a process and services whitelist and blacklist. Now, you can imagine on a contemporary server or workstation, you're going to have literally hundreds, 200-300 services, processes running at any time. The great thing is that for any of these setups, what I can do is just follow the wizard here. So I can pick a device off of the list. So if I say that I want these to be whitelisted, I can pick my device. I've just got one there, but I can effectively, keeping in the theme of the Halloween, I can vampire into this machine. I can suck the life out of it in terms of all the processes and services that are running on it. So I can dynamically build a full shrink-wrap list of the valid processes and services. What does normal operation, regular activity look like on this machine? If it's a new build or a good solid build, I can take that as my blueprint machine. And once I've changed that, I can save this template off. Any deviation from this then will be flagged up as a legal activity, which is what you saw earlier on when I ran things. And there you go, you see that I ran that PowerShell a moment ago, and that was also picked up. So you get an alert, early warning that something is awry with this system. The final thing I'll show you is, if I go back to my desktop, what I've got here is a classic thing. If you're trying to do integrity monitoring of the file system, problem is that there's loads of changes going on. We need to continuously, regularly at least, update our systems, patch and apply patches to the operating system and the applications that are there. That means that without even trying, you're getting lots of change, lots of noise going on. And if you're trying to distinguish between the safe, legitimate, intended changes versus potentially breach activity, which is the whole nub of why change control is such a big deal in security best practices, then becomes pretty tricky. Now, what I'll show you is something that we can do. So if I call up a couple of folders, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take these patches, I'm going to manually do this. I could be using my Windows Update service, but I'm going to paste those in there. So I've patched this application, and they've gone in on that particular machine. It could be, on one machine, a few hundred patches. It could be, thousands of patches going on to thousands of machines. You see here, as I said earlier, this is real-time detection. So you saw those new files get picked up as they were applied to the machine. But something interesting here has happened in that you can see here as these files have been applied, they've come through as indicated as planned. I'll go back to my dashboard. You saw that earlier on. So I've got a bunch of planned. In here, I've got my 5 unplanned changes that I need to look at. Now, the change that I've just made, in fact, if I filter off to the time of this demonstration, let's just put that filter on to make that a little bit clearer and get that moving through. So if I just stick that on as 4 p.m. change that. So out of the changes that I've just made within that last couple of minutes, one of those files has popped up as in need of attention, red exclamation mark. You can see on here that the reason why that is because, well, I've called it my non-whitelisted file. All of my other files, and this is what happens with a Change Tracker Gen 7 system. As that activity is detected, it is automatically in real time assessed against this fast cloud that I mentioned previously. So this massive repository of known safe files gives us a whitelisting capability. That means that if I've got zero-day malware, it's not going to be whitelisted. And that means that it will show up on my list as suspicious activity. And more often than not, this is just either a bespoke file, something you've developed in-house that we don't yet have on our whitelist. It could be something really, really new for a bit of a left field application that, again, it's not quite on the whitelist yet, because a little bit like zero-day malware, zero-day safe, legitimate files also have to be added to the whitelist. They have to be assessed and catalogued in there. So there's potential for a tiny time window when these things will be flagged up. But as a safety first measure, it's really, really valuable. And you can see how it worked there. Even though I applied 20 files to that machine, they're all assessed instantaneously, and only the one suspicious one was left as needing attention. I'd see that on my dashboard. I'd get email alerts, obviously, to investigate that, and that would be the one that I would pull out. The final thing is that in a large estate, what I can then do is create what we call an intelligent plan change. So, in effect, I can augment my fast cloud with a local whitelist to say, look, these particular files, I know what they are, I know the origin of them, I know that they're safe, and therefore I can create a rule. What that means is that if this same activity is seen again, even if it's on 10,000 other servers, as those events are received, we'll automatically approve them as safe as planned. And what that means is that even if you've got tens of thousands of file change activities, the one that's the ransomware will be isolated and picked up for you. Okay, well, that was probably it for the demonstration. I just wanted to show you some of those things. And there you go. Good, happy days. I kicked off that report earlier, and you see we've been able to restore that back to 100% security by running that group policy object against this machine, which imported those settings and got us back on our feet again. So, and as I say, we can make this available to you as part of the follow-up. But hope that's been useful. Hope it wasn't too scary. And if I could just thank you all for your time and attention. Hope it wasn't too horrendous. Good luck in heading off the ghoulies and the ghosties tonight, the trick or treat. Don't have nightmares. Okay, thanks for your time. Please get in touch if we can talk to you further about ransomware, malware, change control, cyber security, or even zombies or the living dead. Have a great evening, and speak to you all soon. Thank you.